the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis, Samir Saran, and to all members of this most distinguished audience. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm indeed very grateful to the Observer Research Foundation for affording us this opportunity. Needless to say, we too were deeply looking forward to this particular event. Well, it is indeed a fact that the world is more multipolar than ever, but the global governance structures remain frozen in time. So gathered here today, we confront an issue, and if I may say so, of monumental urgency and gravity: the imperative to reform the United Nations Security Council. This call for change is not just a procedural necessity, it is a moral imperative in our quest for global justice and equity. Allow me to extend my warm congratulations to Samir Saran and the Observer Research Foundation for orchestrating this exceptional platform, a testament to their commitment to fostering meaningful dialogue and actionable insights. Now, as we were just told, the United Nations Security Council, conceived in the mid-20th century, 1945 to be precise, has since been the cornerstone of international peace and security. All of you know that. However, the rhythms of the contemporary world are vastly different from that of 1945. The global order must reflect this reality. Our world, I'm sure you'll all agree with me, has undergone monumental changes. The global balance of power has shifted and new challenges have emerged. The existing structure of the Council, with its 5 permanent members, no longer reflects the current realities. The need for its expansion, and I would say democratization, is not just a call for change, it is a demand for justice and fairness in global governance. Now let me pose 3 basic questions to this audience. Question 1. The topic is Reformed Multilateralism. It's up on the screen. I ask you, can we practice Reformed Multilateralism in the 21st century through a body such as the present Security Council that celebrates the principle to the victors belong the spoils, privileged more than 3 generations ago? The second question. The UN Charter, as indicated by Article 109 of the Charter, never wanted this composition to be cast in stone for perpetuity, and that is why it had recommended a general review conference of the Charter to be held before the 10th UN General Assembly. 77 years later, I should say 78 years later, we are nowhere closer to making this a reality. So why is this stasis? That's the question. Why is this status an acceptable state of affairs? My third question. Can we practice reformed or even effective multilateralism by defending a charter that makes 5 nations, the P5, 5 nations more equal than others, and provides to each of those 5 the power to ignore the collective will of the remaining 188 members? How does that even work? So the urgency of this reform cannot be overstated, and in a world where conflicts are more complex and threats to peace are more varied, the global community looks towards a Security Council that is more representative, more inclusive, and more effective. A council that not only understands the nuances of new challenges, but also respects the voices of the emerging world. As India strides forward, and you don't need me to tell you that, but nevertheless, as India strides forward on the path of development and global leadership, it seeks a rightful place in a reformed Security Council, a place that reflects its contribution to world peace and its status as the world's largest democracy. Let me also add that India's journey at the United Nations, where I'm privileged to serve right now, has been one of profound commitment and constructive engagement. From peacekeeping missions to sustainable development, India has always championed the principles of the United Nations. And now, we call upon the global community to echo our sentiments for reform. It is time for the Security Council to evolve, to transform into a body that resonates with the dynamics of the 21st century, a body that upholds the principle of one earth, one family, one future, as envisioned by the Prime Minister of India. So in these pivotal moments, which is today, we stand at the threshold also of a new era, an era that calls for a reorientation towards reformed multilateralism, a multilateralism that is adaptive, inclusive, and equitable. This is not merely a call for change, it is a call for justice in the global order, a demand for a seat in the table where decisions impacting billions are made. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I taper off, the message to me, at least to me, is very clear. We need a United Nations Security Council that mirrors our world in all its diversity and dynamism, a reformed multilateralism that is not just a concept, but a living reality. It is time for a United Nations Security Council that embodies the ethos of our times, a council that is ready for the challenges of today and the opportunities of tomorrow. Thank you very much for your attention. I can assure you that we on our part at the Permanent Mission of India to the United Nations in New York will continue to work for a multilateralism that is fair, that is just, and that is reflective of our collective aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kamboj. May I now invite His Excellency Dennis Francis and Dr. Saran to please join us on stage.
Thank you, Jebel, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I want to do the Indian thing and ask you, when are we becoming members of the Security Council? But I'm not going to do it. You've been asked that enough times already, so I'm going to refrain from asking. But you can answer. I'm not asking you. But maybe what I could ask you is that tell us a bit about your trip to, your visit to India. This is your second time here. And maybe just a few reflections on the visit until now.
This is my second visit to India, the first one having taken place in the year 2010, when I was ambassador of Trinidad and Tobago to the World Trade Organization in Geneva. India hosted a meeting of ministers of trade, and because I had a very a sort of similar responsibility actually to the one that I have now as chairman of the negotiating group on rules, I had to come to this meeting. And compared to what I recall of India then, in relation to what I've seen now, the transformation has literally been phenomenal. This is a country clearly on the move, reaching for the skies, legitimately so. Great dynamism. I had the experience of meeting with the company that has developed the digital payment system. They told me that one of the great successes of the system is that it has saved approximately $30 billion. India is a leader, not just internationally, it's clearly a leader at home as well, with great ambition, achieving great things, demonstrating to the world that it has the capacity, it has the will, and it has the vision, most important, the vision to elevate itself to provide high quality service and products, both at home and abroad. And I am so moved and impressed because this is exactly the type of development that the UN is trying to promote in the global south. So India constitutes a leader for us, a model, if you will, a model of ambition and of success and of greatness. You have the benefit of having an ancient culture and a proud one. I had the good fortune to be in Rajasthan yesterday? Yes? 2 days ago. Visited Jaipur and went to the palaces. Extraordinary. Really extraordinary. So I'm not Indian, but I feel the pride of India. Because as developing countries, we aspire to improve and to take control of our destiny. And to a significant degree, India has done that. Amazingly so. And in a relatively short space of time. So I think there is much that India has to offer the world, and there is much that the world can learn from India. Not the least of which is that this is a very culturally diverse country. I saw on a sign somewhere that today is National Voters Day. I've never seen that anywhere else in the world. And I said to my friend, the permanent representative, this is so unique because it's promoting the democracy internally, it's really, I don't have the words. In fact, I do, and it keeps playing in my head. Incredible India. You remember that advertisement on CNN? Incredible India.
I think it can't get better than this. It's a good time to end the conversation. No, thank you so much for your very warm words, and I hope you keep coming back. We have, of course, I'm revealing my age, but we have very fond memories of Trinidad and Tobago as well,
Yes.
cricketing ties and
Yes.
and the fantastic sports people from your country, the music. We love that part of the world as well. Secretary General, but unfortunately we have to discuss multilateralism.
Yes.
And in some ways, it is because of our relationships and because of the communities that have risen together in the last century, in the second half of the last century, that we are discussing this. For us, we believe in globalization. We want global integration. We want economic ties. We want peace and security. The best days of our countries are ahead of us.
Absolutely.
And we are more invested in the stability of the future system than those who have already made the gains, right?
Yes.
So we have to discuss multilateralism because we hope. And in that sense, in your view, what are the key challenges to multilateralism today, to the world that we live in right now, and how can UN member states respond to these contemporary issues?
The key challenges to multilateralism essentially derive from division. We are living in a very divided world as a consequence of a confluence of a number of things. First of all, you have the geopolitics of the world. And I'm not now talking per se about the multipolarity that characterizes the contemporary international system, although that is not unimportant. I'm talking largely about the geopolitics as it relates to 2 or perhaps 3 dominant players that finds its way and gets imported into virtually every area, most importantly into the operations and functioning of the Security Council of the United Nations. But let us not forget or minimize the impact of the global pandemic. Because that episode in our history raised the veil on the real nature of international relations. You would recall that there was a lot of discussion at that time and angst over the fact that while some countries were hoarding vaccines, many countries had no access to vaccines at all. In fact, I believe in the case of the African continent, no more than 4% of the population had been vaccinated. It took countries, many of them in the global south, like India, to show leadership in gifting vaccines to many developing countries, including my own. Now, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago and the countries of the Caribbean community, we faced a peculiar problem. Because whereas the funds were available to purchase vaccines, when we approached the market, they said to us, no, we can't sell to you. Your numbers are too small. We need to sell to the big countries, 80 million, 100 million. The population of Trinidad and Tobago is 1.4 million people. It's the second largest, in terms of population, second largest member of the Caribbean community. So here you had a situation where the market was rationing vaccines. That's a frightening thing. It's very frightening, and in fact, the consequences of that, by way of mention, it's important. It has raised fundamental questions about the treatment of public goods during times of global emergencies. What ought to happen? So you've had the pandemic, you have the geopolitical tensions, then along comes, of course, you already had the conflicts of climate change and the fact that those who caused the problem have been slow to respond with honor in providing the resources needed to stabilize global climate. And then on top of that, you've had rising inflation, you've had global food insecurity, war in Ukraine, war in Gaza, conflicts across Africa, lawlessness in Haiti. It's almost a perfect storm of crisis. Not good for confidence. It's not the atmospherics in which you make a deal. And so all of these things coming together has really undermined the ability of the United Nations to have a common view, a common vision of what needs to be done. It isn't per se that most countries do not have some sense of where we need to go. But somehow, when we get into the conference room, that notion of what is required to bring us together goes out the window, and countries resort to very, very almost insular nationalistic behavior that does not bode well for multilateralism. And so these challenges we confront, we've got to find credible and lasting solutions for. It's the only way. That is why when I took the office of President of the General Assembly, I pledged that I would work hard to restore trust and confidence in the system, to reinvigorate multilateralism. Because, as our moderator just said, It's the best game in town. And it's the best game because it's really the only credible game. Where else do you find, can you find, a forum that treats everyone equally? One man or woman, we are in the 21st century. I am promoting women's empowerment. One man or one woman, one vote. It matters not how large your arsenal is or how successful your economy and your stock exchanges. I've just come from visiting the Indian Stock Exchange. I'm proud of its achievements. So the UN provides that forum for open debate. Unhappily, at the moment, that kind of open debate is not happening in the way it needs to. Countries come to the floor and they deliver very doctrinaire, rehearsed statements without really listening to each other and interacting and responding to each other. And then ambassadors go back to their offices. So we really need to make a valiant effort to engage, to build that trust, to give people a sense of comfort that we have to do it, we can do it. It is not beyond the realm of possibility. Our history, the history of the UN has demonstrated that when the moment demanded it, we've risen to the challenge. And we can do it again. It will take bold leadership, but it is not beyond the realm of our possibilities. And so all of these challenges come together to undermine the system. Unfortunately, now, the UN basically has three parts: the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Economic and Social Council. What the public tends to define as the UN is the Security Council. And in a way it's understandable because this is about peace and security. So when the Council falters and is not able to take decisions on critical issues, particularly issues of a humanitarian nature, people say, oh, the UN has failed. And in a sense, they're not wrong. But the UN is more than the Council, significantly more than the Council, because the rest of the UN work continues and in a way does not attract the attention of the media and of the researchers in the same way that the work of the Council does. So I think I should stop here and let you...
No, I think you made a fair point. That I think, for me, the takeaway is that member states have to rethink their engagement at the UN and certainly with each other if we need to make progress. But let me come to a second aspect of the UN itself. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has thrown his weight behind reforms. He's wanting to breathe fresh life into both the Secretariat as well as revitalizing the Security Council. There are some friends of mine who say the problem is the bureaucracy of the UN itself. It is resistant to change. It has resilience like none other. Is that true?
Well,
maybe you can't answer that, right? You have to go back to office.
I can. I'm not known for dodging questions. Okay. Unarguably, the UN is a large organization. It's huge. It has to be. It has to be. You can't service 193 countries and have a physical presence, an operational presence in the bulk of those countries without having the bodies to deliver those services. And those services are important services. They exist in in different ways in most countries in the global south who rely on them. So you cannot avoid the fact that it is large, and somehow, perhaps because it is so large, and because it is so cautious, the UN is an extremely conservative organization. There's no doubt about it. It's conservative. On a day-to-day basis, you would be amazed at the length to which the UN goes to ensure and to give members the confidence that in spending its money, its resources, that expenditure takes place in a totally transparent and defensible way. I mean, it's quite extraordinary, because they do not want the member states who contribute the resources that run the UN to think that they're engaging in profligate spending, and you're spending other people's money so you don't care. The UN is actually underfunded, believe it or not. It's woefully underfunded. We have a clock at the UN that actually counts the resources spent on armaments. I can't remember what the figure is, but it's staggering. And the clock counts by the seconds. You see the trillions of dollars being spent. The UN budget is something like 2.2 or 2.3 billion US dollars. You know, and peacekeeping alone accounts for a large chunk of that. So, yes, there is bureaucracy. We don't deny that. And old habits do die hard. But, and to be sure, several secretaries general have engaged in activity to make the UN leaner, meaner, more fit for purpose. In fact, there are places in the world where staff has had to be let off. Staff who are needed to run important programs for the host countries in which they are located have had to be let off because of financial constraints. And because the reality is that there are those countries who use the payment of their contributions to further their political interests. Let's put it like that. This creates great pressure on the system. So there is that dimension. But the reform, the key reforms that are needed in the UN really start with the Security Council itself. It is not fit for purpose. It is anachronistic in the 21st century. There are those who claim that it's undemocratic. And if you think, I mean, you know, the P5, the permanent five, who have an elevated status, if you think about it, 3 of those members come from virtually the same region of the world. It's incredible, and it's unsustainable.
And they can't even maintain peace in that region.
I think, in fact, the fact that that war reared its head in that region, shocked them. It really shocked them. They never thought that that region would be visited upon by war and conflict. And therein lies an important lesson for all of us as peace lovers. You know, I believe that we've tended to take peace for granted. You know, you don't have hostilities, open hostilities, and therefore you interpret that as peace. But peace is something more. Peace needs to be nurtured and cultivated. We need to invest in peace. And I think we've done ourselves a disservice by under-investing in peace. Because development is not possible without peace. It is the, I was going to say, it is the centerpiece. And it is. It's the cornerstone of peace. And so we must make a greater effort. I find myself more and more, I'm not saying this because I'm in India at all, but I find myself more and more in statements that I make in New York and in other places, reminding people of the dictum of your own father of the nation, that there is no way to peace. There's no way to peace. Peace is the way. It's the only way. Peace is a decision. It's a decision. So when countries decide to violate the Charter, to invade other countries, that is a decision that someone took. To break the peace, to ignore the Charter, you know, to violate the rules. And it cannot work, it must not be allowed to work, because if it becomes a precedent, then we will be living in utter chaos. Utter chaos, and we cannot have that. The world needs more stability and more peace. Unhappily, we're living in a time where there's a deficit of peace. So, you're right, the Secretary General is very invested in reforms of the UN, as indeed the member states are. The General Assembly is extremely concerned. We have a process. It's not advancing at the pace that we would hope for, but that is not a coincidence either.
In fact, I'm going to come to you on the process in a little bit.
That's not a coincidence. Those who enjoy privilege are never in a hurry to give it up or to have others enjoy that privilege, because in allowing others to enjoy it, your status drops. So we keep fighting because without a properly functioning, agile, inclusive Security Council, the world would be in extraordinarily great peril. We must have it. We must have it. If we are to achieve the ideals and goals of the Charter, and that is to allow human beings everywhere to live in dignity and to fulfill their ambitions, peace is a preeminent requirement. And that's why peace is at the top of my program of activities during this presidency.
Excellency, let me also ask you about the additional burden. With the P5 not working, the burden on the GA has increased. The Global South sees the General Assembly as the last recourse. What does it do to your job, and what does it do to the process?
I don't disagree with you at all, except I would not characterize the involvement of the General Assembly in matters of peace and security as a burden. The fact of the matter is that the Charter does assign residual responsibility for peace and security to the General Assembly, as long as those matters, the particular matter, is not actively engaging the Security Council. So, for example, the General Assembly and the Security Council would not simultaneously be debating a resolution on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. That will not happen. The rules do not permit it. But if, as happened, the Security Council had failed to come up with a resolution on Gaza, then action shifts to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly has been robust and adroit in addressing those issues. Because, of course, the General Assembly represents the opinion, the political opinion, the legitimate political opinion of 193 countries. Some people who don't quite understand the way the system works tend to dismiss the General Assembly resolutions as being toothless because they do not have the force of law. While, on the other hand, the Security Council resolutions have the force of law. But show me a country anywhere in the world which is content to be isolated, politically isolated. And that is what
the General Assembly can do.
Yes. Apply political pressure in a situation where a country is in clear violation of its obligations under international law and is engaging in inappropriate, unlawful activities. The General Assembly can apply and does apply political pressure. And if that country persists in that behavior, the pressure also tends to rise. More resolutions are passed. So it is not that the General Assembly is toothless at all. It represents international public opinion. And when the Security Council fails and matters come to the General Assembly, as it should, because the Security Council acts on behalf of the General Assembly. So the requirement now exists for the Security Council, the offending member who used the veto in the Council. Every time a veto is used, that member must come before the Security Council, before the General Assembly, and give an account for why it used the veto. What were the circumstances? How could this country act in a way that is in denial of major international public opinion? Now, the reason for that is to get countries not to use the veto arbitrarily. They will think once, they will think twice, they might think 3 times before they use it, because the arbitrariness that existed before will cause them to pay a price now. So they must come before the General Assembly and explain why they acted in the way that they did. And this is good and it's appropriate for transparency and for accountability. They must give an account to the General Assembly as to why they are acting in a way that undermines the credibility of the system, does not reflect and encompass the views of the majority of states. And therefore, come and explain yourself. So, and of course, this rule, as in all rules, applies across the board. There's no selectivity. So we've had the rule applied in respect of the situation in Ukraine, and we've had the rule applied in respect of the situation in Gaza. Because the system, to be effective, requires balance and equidistance and equality of treatment.
So, Excellency, before I turn to our audience here to pose a few questions, we are all looking forward to the Summit for the Future.
Yes.
I think there are expectations that finally we may see a new architecture, a new energy around the Security Council reforms.
Yes.
What should we be expecting? Is this something that you would be betting on?
I've just come from the stock exchange and he's asking me about betting.
I mean, I would bet on the Indian Stock Exchange, not on the intergovernmental process.
The Summit of the Future. This is the big ticket item for 2024. And the impetus really is to move things along decisively, to advance progress on reforming the international governance systems, including the Security Council, but not just the Security Council, the international financial system that is set up. Well, let me say that differently. That was set up at a time when most countries that are independent now did not exist. Mm-hmm. And therefore their interests, their needs and priorities were not contemplated in the establishment of these organizations. The World Bank, the IMF, the International Finance, IFC, etc. They were not contemplated. But there's a different reality now. And many of these countries find themselves overburdened with debt simply because the rates at which they are called upon to borrow are punitive. Even in the height of the pandemic, I remember reading a report. The average developing country was being asked to pay 8 and 9% interest on loans. But if you were from the developed north, that rate of interest would drop to maybe 2%, maybe 1.5%. So developing countries have racked up an enormous burden of debt that literally dominates their finances, leaves them little fiscal space to finance sustainable development. Sustainable development requires funding.
Correct.
You're being asked to undertake reforms, but you don't have the wherewithal to finance those reforms. And those who traditionally provided some support seem less and less inclined to do so. The means of implementation, which form an integral part of the undertaking of the SDGs, have been extremely slow to materialize. Mm-hmm. All of this as well undermines trust. Mm-hmm. Promises made cannot and ought not to be broken, because that undermines trust and confidence in the system. Why should someone accept your word at face value when you've consistently demonstrated that your words are wind? Mm-hmm. You don't honor your commitments. True. We can't have international relations operating in that way. So, the
summit.
The summit is going to address international governance issue and hopefully, to quote the Secretary General, help to turbocharge the SDGs. Because the commitment given by the United Nations in 2015 stands. We are not turning our back on that. That was a commitment given, and the UN is obliged to use its best effort to get the SDGs completed by 2030. Developing countries have insisted upon this, and rightly so. But the summit will do additional things. The summit will address some important issues, some important themes going forward. Things like sustainable development, but an area in which a country like India
Technology.
has an extraordinary capacity. Technology, the use of artificial intelligence, how to harness that intelligence in a way that really fuels sustainable development, but does not undermine the social fabric and cohesiveness of society. Because as you know, some ethical issues arise. Issues, for example, of privacy, the use of your private data for large corporations to have access to your private data and to be able to use and manipulate that data in such a way as to manipulate you and your consumption patterns, so that they sell you things that perhaps you independently you would not necessarily buy. There are some dangers there. That's why the Secretary General has appointed 2 high-level committees. One is an expert scientific committee to advise him and the organization on the processes, but also a broader committee comprised of lawyers, doctors, ethicists, philosophers, social anthropologists, historians, etc. Because we will have to confront some moral and ethical issues in order to ensure that the required guardrails are in place to control what I would describe as the corporate instinct, the unbridled corporate instinct for excess. So the Pact of the Future, which the summit will create, is going to be a bold statement of how the world will function, perhaps for the next 3 or 4 decades. And so the engagement and involvement of young people, and I'm happy to see a number of them here, is extremely important because the future belongs to them. We need their input and engagement in helping us to understand what their needs are, how they see the world functioning. What do they think would best suit their generation in order that they can be successful?
Excellency, I'm posing my last question to you. You heard our permanent rep speak. What difference has India's voice made to the discussions on the reforms process and certainly on the reforms of the Security Council itself?
I'm glad you asked that question. Because when India speaks at the United Nations, you can hear a pin drop. Everyone sits up and listens. And this is not per se new. It's been that way for some time. Because India exercises great leadership at the UN. In many ways, it is the influential voice of the Global South. And the fact, for example, that it facilitated and arranged for the African Union to have membership of the G20 gives it the moral authority to act in that way. So it's not a surprise that India and the United Nations have a very strong and enduring partnership. You know, India has a model for what the United Nations Security Council should look like. And it presses for a more directional approach to be taken in addressing the issues around reform of the Council. Because there are some countries who are not in a hurry to engage in reforming the Council. They like the status quo. Mm-hmm. But India keeps pressing. There are others, but India keeps pressing with the support and engagement of a couple of other countries who shares its view about how to make the Council really democratic and functional. We cannot have, what we have now is a dysfunctional Council. The UN cannot achieve its objectives. We cannot save people's lives, enhance the quality of their lives, give them a sense of security and purpose with a dysfunctional Council. It's a conundrum. So, let me say here that India's leadership in these discussions is absolutely crucial, as indeed will be its leadership in the negotiations for the Summit of the Future. Because it has the competence and it has the moral authority to challenge the status quo. And to challenge it in a way that not only in a way that it benefits the entire international community. It alters the course of what is happening now. And so I'd like to, in this company, thank the government and people of India through your very dynamic, you should be very proud. Sometimes I wonder, when does she sleep? Because virtually every week or every other day, there is an activity that is being organized by the Permanent Mission of India.
And even her team asks that same question. but please join me in applauding Ambassador Kamboj for the fantastic work. So let me turn to you. We'll take a few questions. You can also, by the way, since you have India's senior most diplomat here, someone who's served across the world, you can also pose questions to her. She didn't know this, but I'm just a curveball man. So you can also pose a question to her. I see lots of young ladies there who would probably want to ask you questions as well. So go ahead.
Good evening. Myself, Professor Nikita from Christ Deemed to be University. So my question is kind of a follow-up question which we were just discussing. You recently mentioned that we need a council which is more balanced, responsive, democratic and transparent, right? So to achieve it, what are the key priority areas where we need reforms? What are those key reforms? And as a precedent, what do you think? How can we achieve it in presence of a strong veto with P5 countries?
Okay, can I pick up a couple of them?
Sure.
I saw some hands as well. So, Saroti, please, you choose here. It's your generation, your reforms, your institution.
Good evening, sir. So myself, Westbert, I'm a student of political science. I have got many questions for you, but
No, only one.
Due to the short of time, I'm asking only 2 of them, please. So
This council is not democratic. Only one question.
Okay, sir, I'm asking only one. So if UN is the best game in town, according to you, so then what is the need of having NATO, BRICS, and other organizations at the global level?
Okay, fair enough. And final, please decide, Sauradeep.
One from the back.
Yeah, please go back.
Hello, my question is, I'm a student of law from Praveen Gandhi College of Law. My name is Ansh Sharma. My question is to ma'am. Ma'am, seeing that India is a developing nation and it has to toe the line between the West and the East. So how does India manage to achieve its national interest while not upsetting certain nations that might be beneficial to it or might harm it in the How does it navigate those treacherous waters?
So that's a good question, ma'am. How do we continue to seek reforms even as we maintain relationships that are important to us? We can take one more.
I had a question for the president. So you said that people have difficulty understanding the system, and that's where my question is coming from. As you've said that the new goal for multilateralism is sustainability, and as we all know, sustainability is about resources. So, you know, like Palestine, Afghanistan, Congo, all these places have gases, oil, resources. So I'm wondering if, when we're talking about multilateralism, and you said it's a bureaucracy, are the big players using veto to kind of occupate these places to get their resources? Because like sustainability isn't just going to happen on its own. Like it's going to be taking these resources from these third world places which are under occupation. So I wanted to know.
So resource curse. There's Sorori, there's the lady right in front who really wants to ask the question.
So my name is Priya Samant. I'm co-founder of an AI company based in Boston. So I'm here for a visit. So how can the principles of multilateralism be applied to foster international collaboration and ethical considerations in deployment and development of AI?
Great.
Thank you.
So I think you can respond to all the elements that you want to respond to. We have, I think, 10 minutes basically to try and conclude this. Key features of the reforms that you seek. I think that's the question from the First Lady. The veto, I think, has been mentioned twice. Lots of concern on the veto, and are the P5 going to prevent any substantial change using that veto? I think that's basically the thrust. The resource curse, do we see conflicts in regions because of the resource that they possess? So I think that's the point, one of the questions posed. And ma'am, of course, to you, how do you manage this? When do you sleep? And how do you manage our key partnerships even as you demand reforms from those who don't necessarily want to proceed with it? So let me start with you.
Okay.
Excellent.
So let's talk about the question that was asked over here about sustainability. You're quite right. Sustainability requires resources. It requires creativity. And it may well be, I'm from a developing country. I cannot speak with any authority about what motivates those who have the veto to act in the way that they do, except perhaps the peculiar political situation on the ground. And the fact that conceptually there is an interest, their interest that they are protecting when they invoke the veto. Precisely what that interest is not clear. It's not made clear. And there is a sense in which the fact that they have this right to exercise the veto doesn't really require them to be open and transparent about it. That is why we have the mechanism of coming now to the General Assembly and explaining your position. But by and large, when they act in exercising the veto. There is something that benefits them in some way that they're protecting, and that they assign a value over and above what the rest of us are trying to achieve. And that's where the rub is. That is the reason why the question of the veto really warrants careful consideration, because you are creating, in having and maintaining the veto, you're creating two classes of society. Those who have powers that they can use, even arbitrarily, and those who don't. And that cannot be the best approach in managing international relations, not given the complexities of the problems that exist today and that require, this is extremely important, requires burden sharing among all members of the international community. Finding the formula that works so that all countries make a contribution to the solution is extraordinarily important. And that is why the principle exists in international relations and in the SDGs of special and differential treatment, so that you make the contribution you are able to make based on your capacity to do so. Because we have a very perverse situation in climate change, for example. Those who didn't cause it are being asked to bear the burden. You know, and it's improper and it's unacceptable. So, yes, you're right, sustainability requires resources, and we have to manage those resources sensibly. But I can't tell you that it is because countries have their eyes on those. No doubt some of that might exist, but on a prima facie basis, I'm unable to make that link. Okay.
Best game in town. This gentleman says you have BRICS, SCO, Quad, G20.
Yes.
Which is the better game?
All of which are useful. All of which are useful. You know, it's desirable that countries get together and discuss issues, try to identify common interests. Sometimes it's done on a regional basis. Sometimes it's done on the basis of interests. International relations functions on the basis of interests, you know. And if you have a vital interest, you look around and identify countries and or regions that share that interest, because you need to prosecute that interest, to develop it, and to win others over to support that interest. Okay, so all of the BRICS and the regional organizations play important roles in the system. Again, they exercise power and influence in the system. But nowhere else will you find 193 states of different political persuasions, in many cases, different religious foundations, different political outlooks on the world, different cultures, coming together to make common cause and finding common solutions to problems that affect the entire world. And really, when you think about it, it is the prescription for peace. Because differences melt away when multilateralism works. It took the United Nations something like 15 years to negotiate the law of the sea. 15 years. But guess what? The law of the sea works. It has forestalled many wars and conflicts. Can you imagine such a large number of countries, small, large, different, agreeing to accept what we now refer to as the Constitution of the Seas? Because that gives everyone comfort. Everyone fits under the umbrella. The principles are there for all to see. You know, the resources in the deep seabed, for example, beyond national jurisdiction, constitute the common heritage of man. It belongs to all countries and must be shared equitably among all countries. These are important principles of governance, where you remove advantage, you know. And I should say as well, this is not, India is also a leader there in the law of the sea and in the governance of the deep seabed. So it's the best game in town because it respects and values diversity. And that is the magic of multilateralism.
I think there's a final question on AI.
Yes.
Can AI devise better multilateralism? Do you think eventually we'll have to rely on the machines because nation states can't get there? I mean, I'm sorry, I'm twisting your... I mean, just for some fun. Do you think that eventually it'll be Chat GPT or someone that's going to come up with a framework that others might have escaped our attention maybe?
I should hope not. I should hope not, because as powerful and as much as technology is a change, an important and necessary change agent, you know, there is something magical about being human. There's something magical about being human that is irreplaceable. When we stand up in the UN, as we did, and make impassioned speeches about the violation of international human rights and humanitarian law in Gaza, as much as this is politics, it is humanity. There's something extraordinary about finding the words to express sentiments that uplift people, that energize people, that give them a sense of confidence. You know, yes, 2 days ago I visited the Jaipur Fort.
Yes.
I was moved, almost to the point of tears, to see the effect of giving people who could not afford it a prosthetic leg, how it changed their lives. It changed their consternation. You know, being human is complex, but it's a complexity that I think gives us hope and promise for a better world, because it's human values and principles. It is in defense of humanity. It is in promotion of the dignity of people everywhere that we have an opportunity that we must seize to make the world a better place for everyone. So AI, yes, we need it. It will add a quantum difference to our lives. You know, they'll be able to diagnose diseases very early on and maybe take corrective action, as an example. But at the end of the day, machines cannot be programmed to react with integrity the way human beings have the capacity to do. So let us harvest the best of AI, but let us retain our morality and our ethics. The two things are not incompatible.
Thank you. Ambassador, can I turn to you?
Thank you, Samir. To the question that was asked of me, how do we balance off our interests and principles and our friendship with our various countries? I think that was your question. Well, I can tell you unhesitatingly so that we do it all the time in the United Nations. We have excellent relations with all member countries of the United Nations, and we work in very coordinated and positive way with all our partners at the UN. And yet, at the same time, we are pretty fearless when it comes to standing up for our principles, what we believe in. And India, let me tell you, when we negotiate and when we work at the United Nations, we are a voice of moderation, we are a voice of reason, and we are a country that walks the talk. And I think increasingly, the world is beginning to recognize that. For instance, we all know what India did during the COVID pandemic. The president referred to it. Many countries have come up to us and told us that they got their first vaccines from India. And all of you know that we did not monetize that moment. This is a country with a heart. This is a country that believes in one humanity. This is a country that truly believes that the world is one family. And I don't need to amplify upon that. All of you know that, being Indians, and those of you who are not Indians are also very familiar with India's ethos and the way we act. So I think we do it very well. And you have examples in the very recent conflict on Gaza also, where India's position has been clear and consistent. We've been very clear that we do not and will not condone terrorism in any form, in any manifestation, because terrorism, we believe, is pure evil, and there must be zero tolerance for terrorism. However, we stand for a humanitarian response. We stand for humanitarian access. We ourselves are contributing to humanitarian assistance. And we stand for a two-state solution. So that is an excellent example of how India operates, a country with principles, a country that speaks moderately, a country that bridge builds. We have very often built bridges, and what is a better example than the G20 example? Nobody might have given us a chance, but there you are. You did manage to forge a consensus. So this is a very unique strength that India has.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your service and for your leadership. And Excellency, I was expecting the president of the UNGA. I got a philosopher. I think it was so wonderful to listen to you. You could feel it flowing from a very, very special space. Your responses, your arguments, the way you constructed it. And this country truly believes in this institution. It truly believes in your leadership and in the leadership of those who want to move the needle and bring this institution to a new space in this century. And you're also very popular. You went to Jaipur, Macron is going there today. But on a more serious note, you truly are, you would find, as you return, and as you would be taking back lots of fans and lots of young people who would keenly be following your work. You would have a family here in India for life, and I hope you come back again very soon.
I would love to come back.
So please join me in applauding these two wonderful leaders for their contribution. And let me turn it back to my colleague Jabal.